So it's the very end of the year and it's time to go over every single game that I have completed this year. And at the end, I'm gonna even award my Game of the Year. So if you're interested, you just wait until after these. So for anyone who follows the channel, they'll know I like to do lists, but I like to do lists in chronological order. And this is going to be no different, but slightly different. The chronological order in this case won't be so much when the games were released, it's when I played and completed the game. So the first game that I played and completed in January will be the first game that you get to see, and the last game that you get to see will be the game that I finally finished and played in December. Now of course, at the end, as promised, there will be a Game of the Year award. So let's hope you look forward to that one, and let's get cracking with this Games of 2021 list. So the very first game that came off my backlog this year was none other than the very controversial The Last of Us Part 2 from Naughty Dog. Now, this game was controversial back when it released, and you know what? Even just slightly before it released, and mainly due to the storyline, or an event that happened in the story. But for me, there was nothing wrong with that, nothing whatsoever. Also, the gameplay? Well, the gameplay was absolutely fantastic as well in this game. It took what they managed to achieve in The Last of Us and build on that even further, so the gameplay was fine, the story was fine, but there was something very wrong about this game, and the reason that I didn't quite enjoy it as much as I should was the story direction. You see, what we got with in The Last of Us was a video game that played like a movie. For some reason, Naughty Dog with The Last of Us Part 2 tried to make a movie that played like a video game, and they didn't quite get it. I'm not sure it was quite in their skill set as how to achieve that, and I wish they hadn't attempted it in the first place, because the biggest flaw is the story direction. At times this game just drags on, it trudges on, it almost feels like you're playing in some sort of in-engine demo for huge expanses of the time. Also, their use of flashbacks and flash forwards, they were poorly timed and poorly directed. What they tried to do, or what I believe they were trying to do, was show the repercussions of Joel's actions and how that could put Ellie in a cycle quite similar. And to do that, they used a new vehicle, and the vehicle they used was Abby. But the problem with Abby's character in this game is the player doesn't get to fully develop any real empathy for her. Now, with a bit of experienced direction in the story terms of things, you would have felt much more for Abby during playing this game, and that would have been as simple as making the player play as Abby first, getting to experience firsthand straight at the beginning of the game what Abby was feeling just before and just prior to her father's death at the hands of Joel. We didn't, however, see that. No, our first real big story plot twist was, of course, and spoiler coming up, the death of Joel, which totally threw people off, made them hate Abby from the onset. And from then on in, regardless of what Naughty Dog tried to do, and their direction of Abby wasn't great at the best of times, just didn't get the player to empathise with Abby. Now, that's what this game needed to do. This game needed to get the player to empathise with Abby, to understand fully what her story arc was about, what led her to where she was, and how the effects of Joel's actions sent Abby on this spiral, which in turn sent Ellie on this same spiral again. I do understand what they were trying to do, I just don't think they had the experience to be able to tell a story of that size within a video game setting. It could have been done, it could have been done better. I wish they would release a director's cut of this game, because this is all this would take. One simple director's cut of this game could make it one of the best games of all time, but as it stands, no. The gameplay is fantastic, the story's absolutely fine, but the direction of the story is just poorly executed. Sorry Naughty Dog, I love yous dearly, but this one wasn't a winner for me. Now, straight off the back of The Last of Us Part 2, did I choose something maybe smaller, simpler, something easy to dip into? No, I went for Persona 5, and let me tell you, this game absolutely knocked my socks off. This game does have a great story, this game has great direction when it comes to the storytelling, and the gameplay is fantastic. It automatically became a 10 out of 10 game for me, and it's one of those rare games that I wanted to dive back in and play again after playing through for the first time. And considering that was over 100 hours of gameplay, it takes quite a game to make me want to do that, but Persona 5 without a doubt was one of the best things that I'd ever played, not only this year but in, well, almost living memory. So after Persona 5, surely I picked something light, something smaller, something simpler to play, but no, I dived straight into Ni no Kuni 2, the Revenant Kingdom. Now, I did enjoy Ni no Kuni, the first game, The Wrath of the White Witch, fantastic. Obviously the graphical style is beautiful because it's done by Studio Ghibli, and of course it's a JRPG, so there's nothing for me not to like. It didn't quite impress me as much as the first game, but there was a lot to this game that was well worth the play. One of the most unusual and interesting things was the city building element of this game, where Wrath of the White Witch sort of focused on the Pokemon-esque style game that they produced for that one. For this one it was the city building, so it was very much more like a Suikoden game than it was a Pokemon game, so absolutely nothing not to love about Ni no Kuni 2, the Revenant Kingdom. So of course, after two JRPGs, fairly large JRPGs back to back, I dive into action for the next game, and it's SpiderMan Miles Morales on the PlayStation 5, and the game is much shorter obviously than the first Spider-Man game, but it is just, it's all killer, no filler. That's all I can say about this. It was the perfect length of the game, especially for me dropping in after two extremely large JRPGs. The graphics are phenomenal. Of course it's a PlayStation 5 game and this is the PlayStation 5 version that I played, but the gameplay was tweaked enough as well to make it just a little bit different from the first Spider-Man game, but not so much that it took away from what you loved about the first game. So Spider-Man Miles Morales was a well worth playthrough. A great sort of in-between game between obviously Spider-Man and whatever Spider-Man 2 is going to finally look like and play like. So Spider-Man Miles Morales from Insomniac, the wonderful Insomniac games. Definitely well worth the playthrough, and it's a good showcase of the PlayStation 5, or at least the early PlayStation 5 capabilities when it comes to graphics. So following hot on the heels of Spider-Man, I move on to another PlayStation 5 game, well, a PlayStation 5 release of a PlayStation 4 game, and that is Immortals: Phoenix Rising. Now the reason that I played this game is because I heard so many people say it was kinda like Breath of the Wild, and anyone who has watched my recent pickups video will know I've just picked up a Switch to play Breath of the Wild because it's one of those games that I truly wanted to get my teeth stuck into, just didn't have the system to do it. But of course I did have the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 4, so Phoenix Rising wasn't a big stretch for me to get and try that sort of Breath of the Wild sort of mechanics that they were all talking about. And to me, after playing just a little bit of Breath of the Wild and of course having completed this one, they're similar but different enough, and to be honest with you, it depends what you're looking for in a game. For this, I found this to be, well, initially much more fun, lighter. Of course there's much more humour in Phoenix than there is Breath of the Wild, which Breath of the Wild's just a tad bit more serious, but there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek humour in this. And also when I first played it, it felt more like the new Assassin's Creed games rather than Breath of the Wild. So yeah, it was like Assassin's Creed but for kids and with slightly adult humour, so it was well worth the play. I thoroughly enjoyed it and I would recommend anyone giving it a go if you get the chance. Immortals: Phoenix Rising. So next up I wanted another action game with light RPG because I do like my RPG, and I went of course with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and mostly because I wanted to complete the trilogy. I'd played the other two games, completed them, was more than happy to complete them, enjoyed them thoroughly, and had to get Shadow of the Tomb Raider off the list as well. Now I don't know whether I was just Tomb Raidered out at the time, or maybe action RPG'd out at the time, or action light RPG'd out at the time, but I didn't enjoy this quite as much as the other two. That's not saying that I won't play this again. I will play this again. I'll play the complete trilogy again, to be frankly honest with you, because they've done such a wonderful job of bringing Tomb Raider into modern gaming. So Shadow of the Tomb Raider, definitely worth the play if you can get your hands on it, and it's on multiple systems. Next up, I can't show you a game for the game that I completed next because it's digital, and digital only, because if I could get a physical copy, I most certainly would. And that is Stories Untold. Now, if you don't know what Stories Untold is, it's an extremely odd, episodic indie game that takes inspiration from old school gaming such as type-in adventures. So I don't want to spoil too much of it. It is a story-driven game, and the most I'm going to say is that the protagonist, the person you're playing, you're pretty much exploring their psyche through old school gaming, which absolutely fascinated me. So if you get the chance to play Stories Untold, then I heartily recommend it, especially if you have a passion for the history of video games, because this game just, well, it knocked it out of the park for me for a small indie game, and that is Stories Untold. Next up was a game that's taken me far too long to get off the backlog. It's a game from a series of games that I adore, that I've played since the very first game, and I will continue playing until they stop making them, regardless of what people say about them, feel about them, or think about them. And that is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Now, I thoroughly enjoyed playing this. It is very long. It's not a game, well, I say it's very long. You can probably complete the main storyline in maybe 50 to 60 hours if you just push through. Of course, the beauty of these games is the exploration. Now, of course, it's set in ancient Greece, and what a wonderful time to be set. And if you've seen any of my previous videos where I've talked about Age of Mythology and the likes, that I do love this time period, and of course, I love Assassin's Creed games. It was the very first Assassin's Creed game that twisted my arm into getting a PlayStation 3 back in the day, and I'm going to continue playing them regardless of how many they put out, because this is absolutely fantastic. It's not going to be a game of the year, but it does exactly what it says in the tin. And if you enjoy the Assassin's Creed games, especially the modern, well, soft reboots of the Assassin's Creed games, this is definitely fantastic and well worth the play. Next off the backlog list was a JRPG, but a JRPG that I've not only not played before, obviously because they're coming off the backlog, but from a series of famous JRPGs that I've never played before, and that was none other than Dragon Quest. And if this one, of course, is Dragon Quest 11, and yes, it was fun, it was light, it was probably a little bit too kiddie for my taste at the moment. That's not to say it's not a good game, it is a thoroughly good game, but when it comes down to what type of game that I want to play at the moment, then Dragon Quest at the moment is just a little bit too cartoony and kiddie, and that's weird considering my love for the Ni no Kuni games. But I think the depth of the storytelling in the Ni no Kuni games was far superior to this. It did have some interesting elements, and I don't want to give any spoilers away for people who haven't played it, but about halfway through the game, when I thought I was actually completing a fairly short JRPG, it pulls the old Castlevania Symphony of the Night on you and sort of flips the screen. Not quite as directly as that did in that game, but if you ever play it and get to that point, then you'll know exactly what I mean. And that was interesting. It did sort of lead on to what was mostly a boss rush after that part of the game, rather than being open world exploration, but it was absolutely fine. It's a good game, I love the series to get into, no doubt, and I will go into the back catalogue and see what the rest are like. But this one was okay, average, that's all it's going to get from me. Dragon Quest 11. Next up is a game from a series of games that I've only just started to get into, and no, it's not JRPG or RPG. Well, I suppose there's light RPG in this, but it's a first person shooter, and it's one of the few games that I've bought this year that came out this year, and it was Far Cry 6. Now, Far Cry 6 for me was very good. It was very good in the ways it's solid like Far Cry 5. I much preferred the story in Far Cry 5. The story in this one, unfortunately, is just a tad light. They don't truly explore the bad guy enough in this for me, so what a waste of a wonderful actor, because it could have been so much better. But the level of fun in the gameplay, well, it kinda harkened me back to Just Cause more than it did a Far Cry game. So if you take Far Cry 5 and you inject a bit of Rico Rodriguez into it, then I think you've got an idea of where this game is going. The story's okay, the gameplay is immensely fun, and there's so much mayhem going on in this one compared to the previous Far Cry games, but it's well worth the play. So it's a slight deviation from what they've done before, but I heartily recommend you picking this up if you like the Far Cry games, and even if you like the Just Cause games and the slightly more fun shooters more than the traditional Far Cry games. And that was Far Cry 6, came off the backlog and happy to do so, and I will dip back in and play this again from time to time. So next up is another game that was released this year. Well, this version of this game was released this year, and not actually this game, because the game I'm talking about is Alan Wake on the PlayStation 5, Alan Wake Remastered. Now the reason that I had to pick this up straight away and play it straight away is because I've wanted to play it since it came out for obviously the Microsoft consoles. Just didn't have them back in the day because, you know, when you're younger, you either have Microsoft or Nintendo or Sony, and I was Sony, didn't get to play it. Was I happy to get this game? Absolutely. Not only because I wanted to play it for a while, but because it's really a decent game, and it's a good example of the storytelling linear games that we got back then that we don't always get just now. Which kinda leads me back to one of the earlier ones, and that was Stories Untold. Kinda similar in style to this, slightly. You'll see what I mean if you ever get to play it. But Alan Wake itself, did I enjoy it? Yes, absolutely. The story was fantastic, I thoroughly enjoyed going through it. The combat, a lot of people have complained about the combat, but you know what? Your main protagonist is an author, he's not a soldier. He shouldn't be able just to, you know, draw a gun and shoot point blank range and snipe people, and he should panic, he should be a bit clumsy and awkward, and that's what I found the combat to be like in this. It's not unplayable combat, but it just, for me, it gave it a level of realism that I was actually playing as some world famous novelist who was having to shoot a gun, rather than a world famous novelist that could absolutely shoot a gun. Hard to explain, I can imagine, but if you get the chance to play Alan Wake, whether it's the original or the remaster on PlayStation 5, absolutely recommend it. It's not a long game, but well worth the play. Great little story and fun gameplay. Now last up, of course, I was going to end the game on an RPG, a JRPG, but from a series of games that aren't traditionally turn-based JRPGs, and that is Yakuza Like a Dragon. And you know what? I don't want to compare to Persona 5, but pretty much like Persona 5, this game absolutely knocked my socks off. I wasn't expecting it because I have very little experience of the Yakuza games. I haven't played more than maybe an hour of any of them, but I wasn't expecting it to be able to translate into a turn-based JRPG just as well as it did. And not only that, this game is an absolute love letter to old school traditional turn-based JRPGs. Not just Dragon Quest, which is obviously cited a lot in it. There's elements of Pokemon and Final Fantasy and just about every JRPG from back in the day that you can imagine. There is a little nod in there somewhere. It's even got Mario Kart levels as well as this. I mean, I could go on and on about the mini games in the Sega arcades and the old school arcade games. This game has just about everything for anyone, and what a game. It's all I'm going to say. What a game. If you get a chance to play this, even if you don't normally play turn-based JRPGs, this game is probably a great introduction to that genre. So, without a doubt, the last game that I played this year to completion and thoroughly enjoyed was Yakuza Like a Dragon. So there we go, that was every game that I played to completion in 2021, with some minor thoughts on them, because you know what, you need some minor thoughts on games, but here we are, and it is time to pick my game of the year from 2021. Obviously from that pile, because that was the games that I completed in 2021, and after much deliberation and much thought, there can be no winner other than I can't decide. I'm absolutely struggling to decide between Persona 5 and Like a Dragon. One is traditional JRPG, great fun, packed with content. The other one is traditional JRPG, fantastic deep story, mind-bending gameplay, and really difficult to decide which one is the better of the two games. They are similar in the fact that they're both JRPGs, but they're polar opposites. They're like two sides of the same coin. It's just whether you want some slightly more serious, thought-provoking story, or if you just want mindless fun and a blast. And that's what it's going to come down to for you. And as I said, really difficult to decide between these two, and as much as I promised that I would give one of them the accolade of Game of the Year 2021, it'd be like tossing a coin, and I ain't tossing this coin. So Persona, Like a Dragon 5, Yakuza, Shin Megami Tensei, just meld these games both together. I can't decide, but either of them. If you haven't played these and you're a fan of JRPGs, then you need to play them. As I say, this was my first proper experience of a Shin Megami Tensei game, my first Persona game, and this is my first dip into Yakuza, and I know it's not a traditional Yakuza game, and both of them absolutely blew my socks off. So there you go, you pick what my game of the year was from these two, because these two games were absolutely fantastic. Now if you've enjoyed this video, even my cop out of not being able to pick one from these two games, then throw me a thumbs up, and if you think I should have picked one, throw me a thumbs down, because that's what that thumbs down's there for. And don't worry, there's ways of seeing that thumbs down. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and as it's the end of the year, I'm going to sign off with the more traditional Scottish end of year signing off, and lang may your Limerick.